Not much I can do about that, sorry.
What, is it the whole
Okay.
church or?
No, it's the banks for here.
Just,
All right, so we're picking up in Revelation 16. We didn't get all the way through. My review didn't go quite like I had planned on it or hoped it would go. But we got to verse 10 last week. And we were able to talk about the first bowl of judgments. And the first one, if you recall, was the sores. And we talked about how they were similar in nature to the sores that God would give to the Jews in the Old Testament times. That was a identifier that they had some hidden sin, and it had that look of leprosy to it. And the idea was that people would know that there was some sin in your life that you had committed, and that you needed to seek forgiveness for, or confession, and that these sores would be only for those people who had the mark on them. Okay, they would be painful. There would be no cure for them whatsoever. The second bowl was that the sea turned to blood, and we had seen this before earlier in the other judgments, but it was only a third of the oceans had turned to blood. Now we've got all of the oceans turning to blood, and that's going to impact all the sea creatures. So no more lobster thermidor or Alaskan crab legs or oysters on the half shell. All that stuff's going to be gone because they're going to die. The water's going to be contaminated. We talked about there's two aspects to when John uses blood does the water actually turn to blood, which is certainly within God's power to do, or does the blood signify the fact that the water becomes unclean and contaminated, and that's why all the life dies from it. In the Old Testament, you couldn't touch blood. If you touched someone else's blood, you became unclean. Thank you. Unclean, and you'd have to go through a whole process and be separated from people, and so there's that sense of it too. And it may be that it's both. Who knows? I mean, obviously, if it's blood, it's going to be contaminated, and fish are going to die. But at any rate, sea life is gone. Okay. So one of the major sources, and we talked about that, one of the major sources of food for the world is now gone. The third, we go from the salt water to the fresh water. Rivers turn to blood. Mark Carell believes that possibly this seawater turning to blood is a red tide. Has anybody ever seen a red tide? I think they happen a lot in the Gulf. I think there's Louisiana. They have these red tides, and what happens is that the water that has the overflow from factories and waste and all that stuff comes down into the ocean, and it feeds a certain type of algae. It's red algae. It's always there, but because their food source is increased, they multiply, and they are red. So the water turns red, and you can't drink that water because it's got this algae in it. It's not good for you. But he believes that that's maybe what's going to happen, and then this red tide will move up the rivers. So instead of it being two separate activities, one builds onto the other. Okay, which is possible. We don't know. But at any rate, now you've got the fresh water gone. So now all the bass and the trout and all that drinking water is all gone. Yeah. Coors goes out of business.
I hope you're not there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but the red wine's still around. But at any rate, so we're going to see, it's more than just what we read. It's a lot of these things this collateral damage that takes place on top of that. And then the next thing comes, not only will they not have fresh water, but now the sun's going to scorch them. The heat is going to become unbearable. I don't know about you, but I'm drinking a whole lot more water these days than I did in December because of the way the weather is. And you think about if it's going to be that hot, people are going to be suffering because they're not going to have the cold water, the water to, unless they come up with some kind of purification system. But then you got cost involved in it, and there's just a lot of ramifications of it. So, and in response, they're into the fourth bowl. They've already been through two sets of judgments already, and what's their response? Forgive us, oh God, because we have sinned against you. No, they blaspheme him. Just stiff-necked people. He's just like Pharaoh. You know, Pharaoh had plenty of opportunity to go, okay, I'm messing with something here that I don't have the ability to beat or compete with. But he continued to fight God, and so that's what's going to happen with mankind. So we're going to pick up with the fifth bowl, and it's the beast's seat of government is afflicted. And I think we talked about this briefly. And what's going to happen is this. Verse 10, then the fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and his kingdom became darkened, and they gnawed their tongues because of pain. And they blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and they did not repent of their deeds. So this attack appears to be, it really kind of depends on how you look at the word kingdom here. There's two ways of looking at this, and I'll just give you both ways. One is that the kingdom represents those that are worshiping the beast, okay? But if you think about, if that is the case, how do you separate the people out? Because you're going to have people that are worshiping the beast living alongside people that are not worshiping the beast. And so this darkness is not a darkness that is like, okay, the sun's all gone. It's that sense of darkness that we talked about where it's palpable. Remember when we talked about in Egypt, the darkness that came upon them? It only affected who? The Egyptians. The Jews didn't have that problem. Israel didn't have that problem. But it was a sense, it was an evil presence. It was that sense of all good being removed, and that darkness was more than just the light being gone. It was just that sense of doom and evil. Okay? And so that's kind of the same thing that's going here. And again, we've talked about this before. There's a lot of parallels between what goes on in Revelation and what went on with Moses and Pharaoh at that particular time. So they're going to be so freaked out by it, and they're going to be in such pain, because remember, you've got the sores, you've got no fresh water, the sun is scorching, and there's no relief for that pain, for those sores. And that they just gnaw their tongues. And that is just that idea of being in such agony that they are doing anything to try to remove that pain and replace it with anything, which could be, which is the gnawing of the tongue. And their response was what? Please forgive us.
No.
Nope, they blasphemed God because of their pains and their sores, and they did not repent of their deeds. So they're continuing on, as we saw with Pharaoh. The further they move along, the more stiff-necked they become, and less willing to humble themselves and admit that they need to submit to God. Okay? All right, so.
Pride is now their God.
Yes. And pride has already been their God, but now it's become, instead of going to save them, it's going to destroy them. Yeah, exactly. All right, so verse 12, the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river, the Euphrates, and its water was dried up so that the way would be prepared for the kings from the east. All right, so now we've got the Euphrates River, and this is the part of the Middle East we're talking about here. One of the things to keep in mind here is that as we're going through Revelation, the part that we're in right now is really kind of focused on the Jews. So a lot of what's going to be taking place, the center point, we in the Western world kind of think that we're the be-all and end-all of everything that God wants to do. So it's hard for us sometimes to step back and go, okay, well, this is the arena where a lot of this stuff is going to be taking place. Because when you go back to the Tower of Babel, essentially what happened was God, I don't know if he came out right out and said it, but basically he said, Satan, you can have the rest of the world, but this is mine right here. This is my area right here. And if you think about it, if God has claimed that part as his, Satan's already got control of the rest of it. So this is the last piece of the property that he wants to get. So this is where his focus is going to be at this particular time. He wants to take this away from God. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So we tend to, when you think of all these things that are happening, think that this is kind of the epicenter of all the things that are going to take place. Okay, so and this is obviously where the Antichrist is going to set up his kingdom. It's going to be in Jerusalem. So all those things are going to take place in God's home turf. All right, so we've got the Euphrates River, and we've talked about this before. Is if you recall, the Euphrates River was part of originally the Promised Land. The land that was promised to Israel from God was as far north as the Euphrates and as far south as Egypt. And part of the problem throughout history was of Israel was they never made it up there. There was only one king that tried to get up that far, and that was David. David was the only king that tried to get up to that northern point. But beyond that, no other king tried to do that. Okay? And that whole territory was supposed to belong to Israel. So, and that's one of the reasons why, Babel was there, and that's where Satan kind of had his religion start and all that kind of stuff. So this is the Euphrates River. It's 1,700 miles long, right? And that is, I don't think it's only been dried a couple, 3 times throughout recorded history. I'll go back to here.
There's a dam that's in Turkey that was built about 30 years ago. Are you aware of that?
Mhm.
They say it could actually shut off all the water in the river.
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me because I'd forgotten about that. So they can control the water that goes there if they want to. And throughout history, one of the reasons that Babylon built where they did was they used the rivers as their protection. It was difficult for an army to cross the rivers to get into the city. So you're using as a part of their, essentially a natural moat, if you will. And then when Darius conquered Babylon?
Yes, Persian king.
Yes.
That's
When
right.
he conquered Babylon, the way he did it, when they're having the party down in the king's cellar, and they're doing many mecca on the wall, Darius's army, what morning?
I'm just making sure.
That we're dying?
You are.
No, we're still alive.
I'm working on it.
Okay. That what they did was, instead of trying to go over the river and through the woods, is they went under the bridge. They dammed up enough of the water so that they could come in the city through the waterway, and totally surprised them because they didn't expect anybody to get in the city. So this was a natural barrier that had been used for protection. Now it's going to be totally dried up. Here's a picture of I don't remember what year this is. This is a picture of the Euphrates River dried up. And it's pretty wide. It's a pretty wide river. Okay? And so that's the first thing that's going to happen. The second thing is the reason it's dried up is so the kings from the east can come. All right. So who are the kings of the east? Most people seem to believe it's China. Confederate. It could be China with all their allies coming from the east. If that's the case, you're looking at the population of China in 2020 was 1.4 billion people. And the majority of them are men. Why?
Because they're making their women have the girl babies.
Right.
I just recently heard it was like so many, how many million? It was
400 million.
Yeah,
400 million baby girls. I don't even have words for that.
There's a lady here in the church who was able to adopt 2 Chinese girls because for a period they were allowing Americans to adopt the girls to get them out of the country. But at one point they were drowning them. If they were born a girl, they would drown them. And this was a government sanctioned activity. So there's more men, and you understand why they did that. Because it's a militaristic society, they need men to fight. So at any rate, their militia, not just their army, this is the militia, this is everybody they can call up to fight, is 2.7 million, was 2.7 million in 2015. That is down, that's like half what they had back in the 90s. In the 90s they had 4 point something million. Now, there's 2 reasons for that. One is that the technology has gotten so good they don't need as many people. Second thing is they're lying through their teeth. You choose whichever one you want.
Probably both.
Probably both. Okay, so anyway, when we talk, it's an army that's supposed to be like 2 million or something that's supposed to be coming from the east. You got the numbers here to support that. So how would they get there? Well, China actually has a highway right now that goes from Kashi to Gwadar Port, which is in Pakistan. And there's an effort that they're going to, let me show you this. This is their highway system. I know it doesn't make sense to you, but just look how extensive it is. And it goes into India, it goes over here into Iran. They've got connections so that their troops will be able to move quickly. They won't have to like slog through jungles and all that kind of stuff. They'll just be able to move. And so they're going to be able to cross the Euphrates because it's dried up. It will no longer be an impediment to them being able to move down and go to war. Okay? Now, sometimes there's some confusion as to who the Chinese are coming down to fight. It's not Israel. It's not the Christians. They're coming down to fight the Antichrist. If you remember, we talked, there's 3 groups of people on the earth at this time. Believers, 666ers, and non-666ers or non-believers. There will be a group of people who do not follow the Antichrist. Okay? So that's what part of this is all about, is them being able to move from the east very quickly and be able to cross the Euphrates. And they couldn't do it if the Euphrates was still, they could, but it'd be much more difficult to get across. Okay?
And these are believers after.
We're talking about believers after the rapture.
That believe that.
Yes, yes. Okay? All right, any questions on that?
I'd just like to add, India would be also a big candidate.
Yeah.
Because from what I hear, their population, I heard that their population is the same as China's right now.
It wouldn't surprise me.
So,
The question is, how technologically advanced are they? China is just a supposition that they have an army. I'm not saying that this is saying it's definitely China. It could be confederation of all those Asian countries there that decide they're not going to follow the Antichrist and they want him out of there. They want to take control of the world and get him out of there. But the numbers so far kind of lean in that direction. Okay, so the 6th bowl of wrath is the second part of this section. And you can see it's kind of scary. So if it's scary as you don't look at the slide. Okay, I'll change it quickly. Carol, you didn't wait. Hold your wait. Okay, verse 13. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. For they are spirits of demons, performing signs which go out to the kings of the whole world, to gather them together for the war of the great day of God the Almighty. All right, so we've got 3 individuals involved in this section here. We have the mouth of the dragon. We have the mouth of the beast. And then we have the false prophet. All right? So this is Satan, this is the Antichrist, and this is the false prophet. The guy that kind of represents the Holy Spirit in the unholy Trinity, if you will. And they're going to exert greater power. What we're going to start seeing now is this combination of political and spiritual power coming together. They're now going to become one, and they're not going to be separated as to a political power and a spiritual entity. Okay, and it says there are 3 unclean spirits like frogs. It's kind of a little interesting thing here. We've seen frogs before. Does anybody remember where?
Yeah.
Where?
The plague.
In the plague, yeah, right. Frogs. And the reason that they saw frogs is because they worshiped frogs. They had a frog god, right? Remember the god that they had that has the head of the frog and the body of a human? Kind of a weird little deal. You don't remember that? Okay. Well, they do. So anyway, and this idea of the frogs here is that they are a swarming creature, and they creep. And according to Leviticus, that makes them unclean. If you remember the locusts that came out of the abyss, the reason that they were described as locusts was because they were swarming. And they were connected with the locusts because they were swarming, and that it makes them unclean. Okay? So this idea is not that really having frogs coming out of their mouth, but what they are doing is that they're spewing lies. They're performing, the spirits are demonic that come out of them. They're performing signs and miracles. There's going to be a time where it's going to be very difficult for people who aren't grounded in the Word to tell the difference between fake and real. People are looking for, a lot of times when people say, well, let's go back to Jesus. What was the thing they always wanted Jesus to do? Perform a miracle. I want to see a miracle. Show me a miracle. And then I'll believe. Show me a miracle and I'll believe. We still hear that somewhat today. Maybe not in those words, but God hasn't shown himself to me. He hasn't done this for me, done that for me. We're this creation that needs tangibles to believe, which is kind of the antithesis of faith. So what's going to happen is these three are going to be performing signs and miracles. And people are going to be drawn to them because of those signs and miracles. Because they're going to be able to do something that nobody has ever been able to do except for in the Bible. All right? With that ability, the world is going to, and we say the world's not going to be 100%, but the world will begin to follow them because of all the miracles and signs that they'll be able to perform.
I wonder if part of it is too, they're going through all these plagues and stuff, and maybe some of those signs and miracles are providing relief from those plagues.
Undoubtedly, to some extent, that's one of the things that brings the Antichrist to power. Is that he's able to do things to relieve the people's physical difficulties. He's able to continue, the economy will continue to prosper even in the light of millions of people dying all over the world. People will still be able to become rich, and so there will be some relief to that. We don't know how much or to what extent, but there will be that aspect to it that they'll be able to deal with some of these things, some of these issues, some of these woes from God, and that eventually that will be what ends it for them, because it'll reach a point where they can't do anything. That God's woes are not going to be able to be dealt with. And what people do. You're only as popular as the last thing you did for me. Okay, you took care of this like 3 months ago, but now we got this, and you can't do this for me, so, we're just fickle like that. So yeah, it's a good point. Okay? All right. I don't want to do that.
Did you draw that?
No.
It's cute.
That was a picture I took of myself when I was in the. It was a selfie. Yeah. This I wasn't necessarily going to go in this direction just now. So I'm not going to. All right, so let's go on to Matthew 15:7-9 says, "You hypocrites, rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me, but in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men." Okay, so I got to go ahead with it. So here's the issue. And I'm beginning to see, the deeper I get into Revelation, the more I begin to see this. That the church is going to play a big part in okay. This is my understanding of what I'm reading. So this isn't the gospel according to Greg. This is what I understand to be what's going to happen. If you recall, we talked about the 7 churches, right? Way back in the beginning of Revelation, we talked about the 7 churches, right?
Yes.
Thank you. And one of the churches was the church of Laodicea. And if you look, if we assume that the 7 churches represent the 7 ages of the church, 7 church ages, Laodicea lines up with us. And if you recall, you probably don't, but if you did, Laodicea was a wealthy church. They had money. Their economy was strong. They had they traded in a black wool. They had the eye salve. Remember the eye salve that they had? It was interesting. I'm reading a book. I happened to catch Daystar, and these 2 ladies were on there, and they had written a book, and they were called Dark Covenant. It's really kind of interesting. I'm not saying it's. I haven't gotten enough far in it to say yes, no, or whatever. But she brings up some interesting points. This is a rabbit trail. The eye salve that they had there in Laodicea, if you remember, it was sent all over the world. It was very expensive. It took care of eye issues. Well, interesting thing, according to this author, the eye salve was for the prostitutes, because the prostitutes wore eye makeup, and the eye makeup would cause infections in their eyes if it was impure, and so they would go and buy this eye salve to get rid of the infections in their eyes. This is rabbit trail. Okay, so this was her kind of talking about well, anyway, she was kind of deaf on makeup. But that's what the eye salve was for. It wasn't just for to help general people. It was there for the prostitutes. Okay, so we've got this church is wealthy, but the one thing that because of their wealth, they were not committed to Christ. And their church was becoming less and less about Christ and more about social gathering. They were basically selling their faith in Christ, their worship of Christ, to emperor worship. If you recall that when Rome ruled the world, you had to pay homage to the emperor, and what you'd have to do is you'd have to go to the temple and take this pinch of incense, and that you would sprinkle this incense over the fire, and you would mumble something about the emperor being king, and that was it. That's all you had to do. The Jews didn't have to participate in that. Everyone else did. And so what was happening here was they were worshiping the emperor and not Christ. And what they were doing was saying, well, what can it hurt? I mean, I'll do it, but I'm not really doing it. I'm just pretending. The problem is that the more they did this, the more they became connected with this, and their witness was gone. Because now you're saying, wait, I'm a Christian, I believe in Christ, but I'm worshiping the emperor. So their witness was being affected. Okay, they were not being impactful in their community. So when we read on the church in the church of Laodicea, the very famous verse, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." Okay. Now, this author, and it's all connected, so I'm not totally following a rabbit trail. When you heard this verse when you were a child, what was it? What did you think it was? What did they tell you it was? What did this mean?
For salvation.
Salvation. Jesus is at the door of my heart, knocking on my door to come in and save me. But if you put it in context with what it's talking about here, the author of this book says what Christ is really doing is knocking on the door of his church and saying, let me back in. I'm no longer in the church with you. Open the door and let me in. Now, I'm not saying that that's what it says, but it certainly makes sense that that would be what it would mean. It just seems kind of odd that in the middle of the beginning of Revelation, there would be this verse talking about the 7 churches and then Jesus knocking on our hearts. So, what's going to happen, that's a long way around to tell you that there's going to be 2 churches at this particular time, the apostate and the remnant. They're both going to believe there's a remnant, but only one will be a true remnant. And the apostate church will be the church that becomes Laodicea to the max, where they're committed to being like the world. And so one of the arguments is that at this particular time, and we're seeing some of this today, we have churches that do not preach the Bible, that their sermons on Sunday are feel-good sermons. You can do this. You can, God gave you this ability. You go out and you do it. You can achieve whatever you want to achieve. It's this sunshine, butterfly, unicorn Bible. And it has no connection with the Bible. Or they'll pull out a verse and make a whole sermon out of one verse out of context and have everybody going out feeling wonderful about themselves and floating on air. We also have churches that have had Islamic imams in their churches and said, we serve the same God. Islam is the same as Christianity. And sorry, it's not. But we have church leaders, well-known church leaders. Yay, thank you. Appreciate it. We were collecting money for you, but we'll keep it. We see. Has anybody ever heard of the ecumenical movement? That started back in the late 60s, early 70s? Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Blessed be you among men.
You put us in cool air.
I got your heat on now, so y'all.
Oh, good. I appreciate that. We're getting a little chilly in here. Yeah. So, in the ecumenical movement was this idea that we need to all get together and talk about the things we have in common and forget about the things we don't have in common. And the problem with that is that in the process, you end up watering down what the Bible says and what you stand for. And so that's what one of the schools of thought is. That's what this is going to happen here. Is the church becomes so apostate that it will pull in. It'll be basically a church that allows all sorts of thought that right now are divergent will now become part of that one church. But they will say that they are the church, even though they're not according to the Bible. Then there will be a remnant which will do as the Bible tells them to do. So every time that we slip away from, every time that we try to justify doing something not doing something the Bible says is a step on that slippery slope to this. And one of the arguments, and I've been guilty of it as much as anybody else, is, well, that's just a cultural thing. And when you begin to do that, then you're taking the Bible and saying, okay, well now I'm going to reform it to fit my culture, and that's the danger of that. Okay, so consequently, that's what's going to happen. This is many people believe this is what's going to be. The church is going to be one of the major influences, but we won't recognize it because it won't be the church that we have today. Make sense? Okay. Let's get off that rabbit trail. All right, so verse 15, behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake and keeps his clothes so that he will not walk about naked. And, Conor McGregor's fight ended with one of them being carried off on a stretcher. His clothes so that he will not walk about naked and men will not see his shame. And they gathered them together to the place which in Hebrew is called Armageddon. So this idea here is just that we cannot afford to compromise our faith because we don't know when Christ is coming back. It's going to be at a time when we're not going to be expecting it, and that we need to be prepared to not be ashamed when Jesus comes. That's this idea of this nakedness, is not be ashamed when Jesus comes back for us. It will be living the life that will prevent us from that. And then this is eventually going to lead to the Battle of Armageddon. Any comments or questions? No?
How much of Revelation is sequential? Is it all in order?
It's really hard to say because there's so many parenthetical. There's this whole section we're still in now is parenthetical. And right now he's have an overview of the whole process in the middle of being in it. There are certain parts that will be sequential, the seals and the trumpets and the bowls, and then after we get done here and get back to the real time, then it'll be sequential from there. But it's not. This is kind of like that John kind of pausing and then stopping. So okay, I need to give you all a picture of what's going. Yeah, giving you an overview of what's going to all happen. Okay, now I can go into the specifics, and you can see why this is happening and how this came about.
I keep trying. There's the 40 in 2 months and the 40 in 2 months, and the first half is bad, but the second half is really bad.
Yeah.
And what we just went over is the second half because this is really bad.
Yeah. All right, so this is the valley of Armageddon, the valley of Jezreel, and this location here is the last fortress, the last watchtower that was built. There apparently is like 25 levels. They in Israel they have these things called tells, and what a tell is you've got a city built or whatever, and it gets destroyed, and another one's built on top of that. That one gets destroyed, another one built on top of that. That gets destroyed. Just keep building up instead of clearing out, and like we do, clearing it out and start from scratch. So this is at the top here. That right there is on the top of the tell, and they're looking down to the Jezreel Valley, which is where Armageddon is. And you can see why when Napoleon stood there and he looked out, he said the armies of the world could fight here. I mean, it's massive. Okay? There's another picture of it. And this just gives you an idea of where Armageddon will be in terms. And Armageddon is located outside of Jerusalem, which is an important biblical point, because the battles wouldn't happen in the city; they have to happen outside the city. The war will be fought outside the city, so this will be outside of Israel, and it says S 25 layers, and there's a theory out there that the people be involved in that will be the ones from the east, and also the Confederation of Islamic nations, because those are the historical enemies of Israel. Okay, I just kind of wanted you to see where everything was going to take place. You can see where the Euphrates is that green line there, and they're going to come across there. Okay. All right. So seventh bowl of wrath. Then the seventh angel poured out his bowl upon the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." Okay, who do you think that is? That's God. Because if you remember, the temple is the same as on the temple in heaven. Is that place right there? You know, you got the basin there, and you've got this is the inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, and this is where the ark is, right? And the ark has the seat on it where God's supposed to sit. So this is the part that we're talking about up in heaven. The voice comes from there, so it's God. And there were flashes of lightning and sounds and peals of thunder, and there was a great earthquake. All of these things are characteristics of God's appearance, God's judgment. Where else have we seen that? In Exodus, right? They're at Mount Sinai. How did God show his presence? Lightning, thunder, smoke, earthquakes.
Is that thing we talked about a couple of weeks, that intense wrath of God that one guy said that is gonna shake? I'm having trouble remembering. But
The
the very
earthquake.
sight of it is gonna force, something in people.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be, it says it's a great earthquake, so it's going to be something that has never been seen before on Earth. It's going to be of a magnitude, it's going to be greater than the earthquakes that hit Nevada and California. And we're talking massive, and it's going to be felt. I would suspect that if it's going to be a great earthquake, it's going to have impact on the globe itself. Okay. And this is such as there had not been seen since man came to be upon the earth. So you take the strongest one that's ever been done, and this is going to be greater than that. All right. And his voice shook the earth then, but now he has promised, saying, yet once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. And that's in Hebrews. It's going to be so great that everything, that the shaking is going to impact heaven as well as earth. Okay? All right, so verse 19. The great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. So the great city is Jerusalem. Here. And it's going to be split into thirds. Don't know how that's going to be done, don't know, but you figure it's done as a way of separating the 3 distinct groups that are living there. And then cities of the nations will fall. Other great cities will be destroyed.
Well, we already have 3 groups of people we just discussed.
Yeah, but I think in terms of Jerusalem at this particular time, the Antichrist will have set up his kingdom there. So you're going to have the idea there. What I was saying is that you've got the three. I'm trying to think. It's the Muslims, the Jews, and I don't remember who the third was. I can't remember. It may be those against him, but I don't think so. That it will separate them out when he comes and takes his control of Jerusalem. He will unite all those groups that are separated right now. Right off the top of my head, I can't remember who the third group would be. I can't imagine that it would be Christians. It could be believing Jews, but it will be broken up into thirds. All right. I don't know if I answered your question or not. All right. So I'm sorry. So what's this? Her cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. The cup here is a symbol that's often used in association with God and with judgment. And there was an interesting connection because there's a cup here for her with Babylon. But the cup was also associated with Jesus. When Jesus was in the garden and he said, if it's your will, let this cup pass from me. What was he talking about? What cup?
The wrath.
Yeah, his death, his wrath, the wrath.
God's wrath was going to hit him.
Right. So that cup is full of his wrath, and Jesus was the one who was going to have to drink it through his death. And so this imagery is being used again with association with Babylon, that she's going to have to drink that wrath, that she's going to take all of God's wrath is going to be put on her and all that she represents. Obviously, there's not going to be a woman walking around whose name's Babylon. She's not going to have a line of clothing, and she's not going to have makeup and all cosmetics. It's going to be, okay? So, let's see if I do that. Nope, I didn't. Okay, so this earthquake that we talked about, that purple line over here is where a lot of people feel that the earthquake line is going to be, when the great earthquake hits. and it runs from the Red Sea all the way up, and it's gonna cause such a schism, it's gonna have an impact around the world. And then, I just showed you all the cities, Dan is as far north as Israel goes, and down to Egypt, and that whole area, it measures wherever the fault line is, about 200 miles is the length, that distance, okay? And then to think that an earthquake over there would have that much impact on the rest of the world is pretty amazing. But and essentially, you're taking that whole part of the world and not splitting it all the way up, but you're pushing it out, so it's going to have impact. So I suspect there's going to be some tsunamis and fun stuff like that. All right, so verse 20, and every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. So you've got the this earthquake is going to be so massive that islands are going to disappear. So probably Hawaii is going to be gone. I mean, most of the islands in the world are basically what?
Okay.
Volcanoes, right? And they're not that sturdy. I mean, they're like, as far as if I understand correctly, my science person's not here, but they're like on a stem. There's a stem that supports them, and then so you break that stem, it's going to disappear. It's not like solid coming up. And so this ring of fire, as you see here on this map, this is where the majority of earthquakes take place. All right. So this area, if it goes off, is going to have a massive impact on the world. Okay. So we're going to have islands that disappear and mountains that will be gone. And as they displace down, what's going to happen to water? It's going to go up. Remember your 8th grade science? Displacement of volume. All right, verse 21. And huge hailstones, about 100 pounds each, came down from heaven upon men, and men said, "Forgive us, God, because we've sinned." No. Men blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, because this plague was extremely severe. I don't know about you. Has anybody ever had hail damage to their car? This is hail damage the guy's not going to be able to take out with one of those little dent remover things. 100 pounds is pretty big. Now, some translations say 70 pounds. 30 pounds ain't going to make much of a difference. 70 pound hail is going to kill you as fast as a 100 pound will. But the idea here is, again, we're seeing nature blown up to a point, to a level that can only be supernatural. It can't be, oh, it's just a bad hailstorm.
It's his wrath.
It's his wrath.
That's right.
It's coming from God. It's not like, oh, this is just, look, this is a bad hailstorm today. I mean, this is going to be bad. And again, we look at it and go, how can people be so stupid? They are. When they've made up in their mind, and don't forget that we've got the Antichrist and his compadres off here doing miracles and signs and making everything look rosy. People are looking over here. They're not looking over here where God is. Okay? So, yeah, I think probably that my people will look like this. I'm not scared. Okay. All right, so just to kind of give you a sense of how all this stuff is happening, a real simple diagram. The first 3.5 years is seals 1 through 4, and then seals 5 and 7 are kind of like straddling that midpoint. And then once you hit the midpoint, the second 3.5 years is the trumpets and bowls, 1 through 6. Okay? So the first seals aren't considered, the seals aren't considered as bad as the trumpets and bowls, and I think most of us would agree that's true. They're not as bad. Okay? Then we have the Battle of Armageddon, which is between Satan and the non-believers. Well, there'll be non-believers, there'll be atheists, they won't believe anybody. And then Christ will return, and then we'll have 1,000 years. Okay? Just a second. All right, so we're finally finished with chapter 16. Any questions on 16? Yes, sir.
One little interesting thing I heard about the hailstones. Apparently, a side effect of a nuclear blast is huge hailstone. Something about the temperature getting shot up into the atmosphere, and it said
Freezing,
like
yeah.
there was something when we tested early testing for nuclear weapons that was out in the water, and a bunch of our ships took a lot of damage from hail.
Yeah.
Because it's just
Well,
something
and you
I
think,
thought was
I
interesting.
mean, you think too that at this time there's going to be proliferation. That's a big word. You like that word? Proliferation. I can't say it again. Proliferation of nuclear weapons, and possibly the earthquake is being caused by that as well. The key though is that I think that we got to be careful about taking it away from God and saying man's doing this. I mean, even if man does it, it's still God called. I mean, it's God's plan. So, and it's very possible. I mean, you're talking about Armageddon. You're talking about wars going on. Fighting's going to be going on at this point as well. It's just not the big war. So that's very possible. Very possible. Okay. All right. So I won't spend time on this because we just kind of went through that real quick one. So let's go to verse 1, the doom of Babylon. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me. We don't know which angel it was. It was one of the bowl angels. Come here, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. All right, so now we've got the key figure now has a real special name. I know all you ladies, when you were little girls, you wanted to grow up and be called this when you were queen of the prom, right? Great harlot. And I was just kidding. I wasn't thinking it right. And so this is kind of this is going to focus. This chapter's going to focus on the great harlot, and the great harlot sits on many waters. In the Bible, waters typically represents nations. Okay. And what's interesting about this is if you take this a little bit further, think about waters. Where does water come from? It comes from rivers, right? Mountains. Does it come from one? Is there like one water mountain in the world and all the water come from it? No, the waters come from different areas, right? So the water is diverse. So there is diversity in the waters. No one's ever heard that term, right? Diversity. Okay, so she's in control basically of, at this point, all the nations, with whom the kings of the earth committed immorality. Now, what's the immorality that's associated with the great harlot? Well, we know what a harlot is, right? We do? Anybody not know what a harlot is?
It's a hoe, right?
It's a hoe, yeah. It's a hoe. Garden hoe. Garden hoe. Yeah. So this is associated with fornication or adultery. Oftentimes when we see the word, a prostitute or whore, depending on the version, it's interesting that the King James Version uses the word whore. And like today, it's like, oh, I can't hear that word. But at any rate, what we're talking about here is infidelity. And oftentimes it's associated with Israel, right? In the Old Testament, they have committed they have prostituted themselves when they leave God and go worship idols, right? Now, in Revelation now, we not have just Israel, but we're talking about the entire world. any religion, any belief that takes away God's sovereignty, you're committing adultery, immorality, as far as God's concerned. Okay? So this is going to encompass everyone who rejects God. So this is a representation. Again, there's not going to be one person that's going, hey, I'm the great harlot. You know? Buy my stuff at Target. It's this idea that represents this anti-God worship. All right? So we've got this going on. That's what the harlot represents. There's this immorality, and we're seeing that it's all the world. It's not just happening in one location. The whole world is at a point where it's rejecting God. And to the point of being drunk with the wine. I mean, what they're doing is, you know, when a person gets drunk, they keep drinking because they have no clue what's going on. And so this idea here is that they just keep getting further and further along to the point where they have moved so far away from God that now they're totally wrapped up in this. Okay? All right, verse 3, and he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. So who's the me?
John.
The angel. He carried me, I'm sorry, you're right. Who's the he? The he is the angel. Okay, so the angel's carried me, who is John, away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay, now the woman doesn't have the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast does. Okay, so you've got, she's seated upon a scarlet beast. Okay, has 7 heads and 10 horns. We've seen this beast before.
Big beast.
It is a big beast. And we've seen this beast before, right? Earlier in Revelation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, or actually be next week. So the scarlet beast, all right, well, anyway, verse 4, the woman, this is the beast, sorry. And then the woman is clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup of abominations and of the unclean things of immorality. So the woman is clothed in purple and scarlet. Purple is the color of royalty. So this would represent governments. Scarlet represents religion, spirituality. So this person is going to be the head of the government and the church at this particular time. We'll have both aspects to it. Well, that's what it says. But you know, oftentimes a woman is used in Bible terms to talk about a nation or a ruler. You know, because if you look at when in the Old Testament, when they talk about Israel, Israel is God's wife, and we are Jesus's bride. So there's that kind of that symbology, yeah. And then she's adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a gold cup. So the gold and the precious stones. Let's see, kind of fits with this. I don't really think that's her, it's someone posing as her. But you can see that, as we read about, she has blasphemies written on her forehead. Well, the priest, if you remember, the priest has that gold band, which has the statement that he, you know, that he worships, that he serves God. So they both have that on their foreheads. She's got gold and precious stones. Well, so does the priest. The priest has that breastplate that has all those precious stones on it. So again, it's another indication of how Satan is copying God. He's creating his own religion. He can't come up with his own ideas, so he copies God. So this harlot is in some ways a mirror image, a dark mirror image of the priest.
Who wrote 1 Timothy? Was that Paul?
I believe so, yes.
Can I read 1 Timothy 2:9?
Yes.
1 Timothy 2:9, Paul is instructing the church. Excuse me. In like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with braided hair, or gold, or pearls, or costly array. So it's the opposite of what we're instructed to do as the church. Exactly like you were saying, mirror opposite.
Right. And I think that one of the things that Paul was talking about there, and I don't want to go into deep discussion on that, was a sense of the, at that particular time, women who dressed like that were prostitutes. That's the way they look, that's the way they seduced men. And if if you see someone on women who don't wear makeup next to women who do wear makeup, there's a difference. And sometimes it's like, she needs a little bit of eyeshadow, you know? But that's because we've been conditioned to it. And again, I don't want to get into the big discussion about it right now, but what? But anyway, so it's exactly what Paul is saying. Don't do. That's what she's doing, because he understood what was going to happen. And also talk about, this is a time when the woman's face was really the only thing she had going for her, because everything else was pretty much covered up. So the way that she could attract a man was what she did with her eyes and her makeup. Okay. So anyway, we'll stop there. I know you want to keep going, but we'll stop there. Yeah.
I'm going by memory. 2-3 weeks ago, we talked about there was a sea of glass in front of the
Yes.
throne.
Yes.
And did that sea of glass have flames in it?
Well, I'm trying to think. I think at that point there was fire that was in it. It was part of
So
it.
I just had this, I think about it all week after we do this. And I thought that it kind of resembled maybe that we bring our works when we're before the throne, right before judgment or during judgment.
Yeah.
And some of our works are burned up like stubble in that fire. And what's not burned up, God can see right through it like glass. I don't know if that's the right translation or not, but that came to me.
Well, I'll tell you, the more I study Revelation, the more it's like anything's possible.
Yeah.
I mean, anything's possible. I'm kind of the point where it's like, there's just so many. This is an onion. Revelation is an onion, and when you pull away one layer, it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't even see that's there too. Pull them up, that's there too. Didn't even see that.
I got a comment about that darkness.
Yes.
You dear people that have never been involved with law enforcement, jails, or prisons. 30 years at Jackson, the biggest prison in the state.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it was in my mind, but you talk about powerful. When you enter that tunnel, that's the only entrance, except there's one in the back. But it's 100 yards long, underground. And I'm telling you, you get kind of numb to it after you've been there a while. And I knew the Lord's protection was over me, but even then, when they slam that steel gate behind you and you enter that tunnel, there's a darkness. The sounds of that prison, even when you enter in, the sounds of men, there's a darkness, even though the sun's shining. And I worked 2 to 10, so I was there while the sun was shining when it was dark, but I'm telling you, and it differed day to day. But being a Christian, I'm sure God was doing different things in my life too, but I'm telling you, that darkness, that smell, that sound is enough to drive a man mad. And I would leave